"That child needs to learn her place before it's too late," growled Mrs. Williams, president of the Residents Association, over the phone. On the other end of the line, Deputy Morrison agreed with every venomous word about the unacceptable situation that had occurred in the park. At that very moment, 9-year-old Zoe was innocently playing in her room, unaware that her simple act of kindness the day before had unleashed a storm of racial hatred disguised as concern for neighborhood safety. 24 hours earlier, it had all started in a seemingly simple way. Zoe was walking through the park when she spotted a man who appeared to be homeless, sitting alone on a bench. His clothes were dirty, his hair unkempt, and he was holding a cardboard sign asking for help. Without hesitation, the girl approached him and offered her a peanut butter sandwich. "Thank you, little angel," said the man, his blue eyes shining with a gratitude that seemed disproportionate to a simple snack. "What's your name?" "Zoe," she replied with a beaming smile. "My mom says we should help those in need." What Zoe didn't realize was that Mrs. Henderson, the gossipy neighbor from the building next door, had photographed the entire scene from her window. Within minutes, the image was being shared in the condominium's WhatsApp group with the caption, "Look at the kind of people this family is teaching their child to hang out with." Zoe's mother, Patricia, worked as a nurse in 2 hospitals to support her family on her own. When she got home that night, she found 7 messages on her phone and a threatening note under her door. "Control your daughter, or we'll control her for you." Patricia felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She recognized the handwriting. It was from Mrs. Williams, the same woman who had tried to prevent her from moving into that upscale neighborhood 2 years earlier. But what neither Patricia, Zoe, nor their racist neighbors realized was that the seemingly vulnerable beggar had observed every detail of that social humiliation. And behind those blue eyes that had looked so grateful was a calculating mind already 3 steps ahead of them all. The man who received the sandwich was not who he appeared to be. In fact, he had enough resources to buy the entire pretentious neighborhood in a single transaction. And now, after witnessing firsthand the genuine kindness of a child contrasted with the toxic prejudice of adults, he had a very specific mission in mind. That night, as Patricia hugged Zoe, trying to explain why some neighbors were concerned about her friendship with strangers, she couldn't have imagined that powerful forces were already moving quietly to ensure that this injustice would come at a very high price. If you have ever witnessed or experienced prejudice disguised as concern, you know that sometimes justice needs a little help from fate. Subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple sandwich would become the tool of revenge that would leave an entire elite neighborhood speechless. The next morning, Patricia woke up to the insistent sound of knocking on her door. Still in her pajamas, with Zoe drinking her milk at the table, she opened the door to find 2 police officers and Mrs. Williams standing behind them, wearing a malicious look of satisfaction that made Patricia's stomach churn. "Mrs. Patricia Johnson?" asked the taller officer. "We've received a report that your daughter is being neglected and placed in dangerous situations." "What do you mean, neglected?" Patricia's voice trembled. Zoe appeared in the kitchen doorway, still holding a piece of toast, her eyes wide. Mrs. Williams stepped forward, displaying printouts of the photos Mrs. Henderson had taken. "Allowing a child to be around criminals and addicts is serious neglect. We've already contacted social services," she declared smugly. The second officer, visibly uncomfortable, whispered something to his partner before addressing Patricia. "Ma'am, we just need to ask you some routine questions about the care of your daughter." Patricia felt her world crumble. Working 2 jobs, studying nursing at night, raising Zoe alone since her father abandoned them, and now to be accused of negligence by a woman who had never worked a day in her life? "Mommy, did I do something wrong?" Zoe asked, her voice small and confused. "No, sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong," Patricia replied firmly, shooting a cold glare at Mrs. Williams. Some people just have a hard time understanding kindness. For the next 40 minutes, Patricia answered invasive questions about her routine, work, and parenting methods while Zoe watched fearfully from the couch. The questions were clearly biased, designed to find flaws where none existed. "And do you leave your daughter alone often because of work?" pressed the social worker who had arrived next. "Zoe stays with Mrs. Martinez from the apartment next. Doctor when I'm at work." "They've had a wonderful relationship for 3 years," Patricia explained, struggling to keep her composure. Mrs. Williams interjected again. "An unsupervised black child in this neighborhood is a safety issue for all families. We have standards to uphold here." Patricia felt a hot anger rise in her chest. There it was. Prejudice, raw and undisguised. Standards, like teaching kindness and empathy, because that's exactly what her daughter had done. After an hour of tension, the authorities left with vague promises of follow-up. Patricia closed the door and leaned against it, trembling with anger and fear. "Mommy, are they going to take me away from you?" Zoe asked, tears streaming down her face. Patricia knelt and hugged her daughter tightly. "Never, my love. Never." But, even as she spoke, Patricia knew the situation was far from over. That afternoon, an official notification arrived. A formal investigation into child neglect had been opened. The process could take months. What Patricia didn't know was that across town in a 5-star hotel, a 65-year-old man was watching the park's security footage from the day before on his laptop. Daniel Morrison, that was his real name, wasn't just rich. He was a billionaire, the owner of a national hotel chain, and more importantly, he had powerful political connections that could destroy lives with a single phone call. He had spent 3 days disguised as a beggar, doing field research, for a documentary on social inequality he was producing. His encounter with Zoe had been genuine, as had his outrage when he later discovered, through his personal assistant, that the family was being harassed by racist neighbors. "Mr. Morrison," his lawyer said on the phone, "I've got all the information on Mrs. Williams and her accomplices. Do you want me to proceed?" Daniel smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the cold smile of a businessman who had built an empire by destroying those who underestimated his determination. "Not yet, Thomas. I want to see how far these people are willing to go. But document everything. Every phone call, every meeting, every comment on social media. When the time comes for justice, it needs to be perfect and irreversible." That same night, Patricia received the first anonymous threatening call. "Stuck-up black woman, get out of this neighborhood before things get ugly for you and your little girl." Patricia recorded the call, something she had learned to do after years of facing subtle discrimination at work. She wasn't naive. She knew exactly what was going on and who was behind it. What she didn't realize was that every move of her persecutors was being monitored by a team of private investigators hired by the so-called beggar, who had vowed to himself that this injustice would have devastating consequences. On Thursday, the pressure intensified. Patricia arrived at the hospital to find that someone had filed anonymous complaints questioning her professional competence. Her supervisor, embarrassed, was forced to place her on administrative review. "It's temporary, Patricia," he explained. "But we have to follow protocol when we receive formal complaints." That night, Patricia held Zoe as she cried. "Why are people so mean, Mommy? I just wanted to help." Patricia closed her eyes, feeling anger and despair battle inside her chest. But beneath those feelings, something deeper was beginning to take shape. A quiet determination forged by years of struggle and discrimination whispered a simple truth. She wasn't just a victim. She was a survivor. And survivors know how to fight. What Patricia didn't yet understand was that her private battle was about to gain an ally with virtually unlimited resources. and a thirst for justice that would make Mrs. Williams's machinations seem like child's play. While Patricia quietly planned her legal defense against the baseless accusations, across town, someone far more dangerous was setting up a chessboard where her persecutors would be mere pawns, about to discover the true meaning of the word consequences. The following week brought a series of coordinated attacks that made it clear to Patricia this was no longer just neighborhood prejudice. It was a systematic campaign of destruction. On Monday, Patricia received a cold call from the bank. Her account had been frozen due to suspicious activity. On Tuesday, her car was towed for an alleged documentation problem. On Wednesday, Zoe came home crying because 3 mothers had forbidden their children from playing with her. "Mommy, why is everyone being so mean to us?" Zoe asked, wiping her tears with the sleeve of her shirt. Patricia felt anger boiling inside her chest, but she kept her voice calm. "Sometimes, sweetheart, people who are afraid of what's different try to hurt us. But that doesn't mean we're going to stop being who we are." That night, while Zoe slept, Patricia called her brother Marcus, a criminal lawyer in New York. "They're trying to break me, Marcus. I need help." "Send me everything," Marcus replied, his voice firm. "Screenshots, recordings, everything. We're going to make these racists pay dearly for messing with our family." Patricia meticulously organized every piece of evidence of the persecution. Screenshots of condo group chats leaked by a sympathetic neighbor, recordings of threatening phone calls, records of unfounded complaints. What she didn't know was that her every move was also being tracked by someone much more powerful. Daniel Morrison had already installed a discreet security team to monitor Patricia and Zoe 24 hours a day. Every threat, every act of sabotage, was being documented in high resolution by professional investigators. "Mr. Morrison," his head of security reported during an encrypted call, "the situation is escalating. The leader of this group is a certain Mrs. Williams. We've discovered she has connections to the mayor and the local judge. She's using political influence to intensify the pressure." Soon after, Patricia opened her door to find a group of neighbors gathered outside, holding signs with messages such as, "Protect our children and safety standards." "Patricia Johnson!" Mrs. Williams shouted in a theatrical tone. "This respectable community will no longer tolerate you exposing our children to dangerous elements. It's time for you and your daughter to find a place more suitable for you." Patricia felt every fiber of her being burn with indignation, but she forced herself to remain composed. "And where would that be, Mrs. Williams? The ghetto you think is our natural place?" A murmur ran through the crowd. Some neighbors looked uncomfortable with the raw frankness of the moment, but most remained firmly behind their leader. "Don't twist my words," Mrs. Williams retorted, though her mask of civility had slipped. "We simply believe that people with your values would be happier in similar communities." At that moment, something changed in Patricia's eyes, as if a switch had been flipped inside her. "I understand perfectly, ma'am. Thank you for making your position so crystal clear." Zoe, who had been hiding behind her mother, stepped forward. "Mrs. Williams, why don't you like me? I haven't done anything wrong." The silence that followed was deafening. Several people in the crowd lowered their gaze, unable to face the innocent question of a 9-year-old child. Mrs. Williams, clearly irritated at being backed into a corner, completely lost her composure. "Listen here, little girl. Your parents should have taught you that there are unwritten rules about who we associate with. When you're a little older, you'll understand why some mixtures are problematic for a civilized society." Patricia had to hold her arms tightly to keep from strangling that woman in front of everyone. But something inside her was calculating, planning. Every poisonous word was being mentally recorded as evidence. "Noted," Patricia said calmly, taking Zoe by the hand. "All your words, every single one of them." That night, while helping Zoe with her homework, Patricia received a call from an unknown number. "Hello, Mrs. Johnson. This is Mr. Morrison's office. He would like to schedule an urgent meeting with you tomorrow morning if possible." Patricia frowned. "Morrison?" I don't know any Morrison. He prefers to explain in person. It's about the incident in the park with your daughter last week. Patricia felt a chill in her stomach. More trouble. All right. Where? On Saturday morning, Patricia left Zoe with Mrs. Martinez and headed to the address provided, a business building in the city center. The elevator took her to the top floor, where an impeccably dressed receptionist led her into an office with a panoramic view. The man who stood up to greet her was unrecognizable. Well-cut hair, tailored suit, confident posture. But when he smiled, Patricia recognized those blue eyes. You're the... Patricia stopped, incredulous. The homeless man in the park. Daniel Morrison, CEO of Morrison Holdings. Pleased to meet you formally, Ms. Johnson. Patricia sat down slowly, trying to process the information. You're not homeless. Definitely not. I was doing undercover field research when I met Zoe. Daniel sat down behind the desk, his expression turning serious. She treated me like a human being. Your neighbors are treating you like trash. That bothers me deeply. Patricia was still processing when Daniel continued. I've been monitoring the harassment you're suffering. Every threatening phone call, every act of sabotage, every conspiratorial meeting between your dear Mrs. Williams and the mayor, all documented in high definition. He slid a folder across the table. Patricia opened it and found photos, transcripts, bank records. We discovered that Mrs. Williams has received substantial contributions from real estate companies interested in revitalizing your neighborhood. The persecution of you and Zoe is part of a larger gentrification scheme. Patricia looked up, feeling a mixture of relief and anticipation. What do you want in exchange for this information? Daniel smiled, but it was no longer the grateful smile of the beggar. It was the sharp smile of a businessman about to close the most satisfying deal of his life. I want justice. Your daughter reminded me that kindness still exists. Now I want to show her that justice also exists. He leaned forward. The question is, are you ready to play on the same level as them, but with infinitely more powerful weapons? Patricia looked again at the evidence in the folder. Each page represented a chance to turn the game around completely. What do you have in mind? Phase 1 has already begun. I bought the building where you live. Mrs. Williams gets evicted on Monday. Daniel paused dramatically. But that's just the appetizer. Patricia felt a smile begin to form. For the first time in weeks, she no longer felt like a helpless victim. What neither of them knew was that Mrs. Williams, in her infinite arrogance, had just made the stupidest mistake possible, completely underestimating the power of a determined black mother allied with a billionaire thirsty for justice. On Monday morning, Mrs. Williams woke up, preparing for another day of systematic persecution against Patricia and Zoe. She had scheduled a meeting with Judge Hamilton to finalize the process of forcibly removing the inappropriate family from her respectable neighborhood. At 58, Ruth Williams had always gotten everything she wanted through political influence and veiled blackmail. Her latest victory had been convincing the mayor to accelerate the neighborhood's revitalization process, an elegant euphemism for expelling low-income black families. Dressed in her best outfit and carrying a briefcase full of fabricated evidence, against Patricia, Ruth headed confidently to the courthouse. She couldn't have imagined that every step toward that building brought her closer to her own destruction. Mrs. Williams, Judge Hamilton greeted her, visibly nervous. We need to talk before the hearing. There have been developments. Ruth frowned. Developments? What kind of developments? I hope you're not reconsidering our position on this troubled family. The judge cleared his throat, avoiding Ruth's gaze. Actually, the hearing has been canceled indefinitely. What do you mean, canceled? Ruth felt the first pang of alarm. We have sufficient evidence of neglect. The documentation is all here. Ms. Williams, interrupted a familiar voice behind her. Ruth turned to find Patricia entering the room, accompanied by a man in an impeccable suit and a team of lawyers she didn't recognize. "What is that woman doing here?" Ruth growled. "And who are these people?" Daniel Morrison stepped forward, slowly removing the sunglasses he had worn since arriving at the courthouse. "Miss Williams, it's a pleasure to meet you officially." Daniel Morrison, CEO of Morrison Holdings. Ruth blinked in confusion. Morrison Holdings? I've never heard of it. And what does that have to do with the filthy beggar that her daughter fed in the park? Daniel smiled coldly. That's me. Ruth's face drained of color. Her brain struggled to process the information as Daniel continued, each word landing like a hammer blow. For the past 15 days, my team has meticulously documented every action of yours against this family, every threatening phone call. And yes, we know it was you. Every conspiratorial meeting, every false report. Daniel motioned to one of the lawyers who opened a laptop. "Would you like to watch?" Daniel asked, turning the screen toward Ruth. "This is you at the mayor's office last Thursday. Crystal clear audio, by the way." Ruth's voice echoed through the laptop speakers. "These people don't understand that there are natural hierarchies. Mayor, a black child influencing other white children to mix with vagrants, that needs to be nipped in the bud." Ruth felt her legs buckle. "How can you? This was a private conversation. You can't..." "Can't do what?" Daniel interrupted. "Document criminal conspiracy, record threats, use legally obtained evidence." Patricia finally spoke, her voice calm but heavy with satisfaction. "Ms. Williams, for weeks I watched you orchestrate a campaign of terror against my 9-year-old daughter. Now it's my turn." Daniel's lawyer opened a second folder. "Ms. Williams, we've discovered something interesting about your finances. Over the past 3 years, you've received $150,000 from Greenfield Development to facilitate the eviction of specific families from this neighborhood, Black and Hispanic families specifically." "That's ridiculous. I never..." Ruth began, but her voice faltered when she saw the bank transfers displayed on the screen. "Oh, but you did," the lawyer pressed relentlessly. "Here you are signing the contracts, and here, talking to the company representative about subtle ethnic cleansing. Your words, not ours." Judge Hamilton, who had remained silent, finally spoke in a trembling voice. "Ms. Williams, I didn't know about these irregularities." Daniel laughed sarcastically. "Oh, Your Honor, but you did know. We have recordings of you, too. Would you like to watch? It's particularly interesting where you discuss how to expedite proceedings against certain families in exchange for donations to your re-election campaign." The color drained completely from the judge's face. Ruth, realizing the ship was sinking, tried one last desperate gambit. "You can't prove anything. This is all a setup. A beggar and a poor nurse against respectable members of the community. Who do you think will be believed?" Daniel approached slowly, his blue eyes now as cold as Arctic ice. "Mrs. Williams, allow me to present some figures. Morrison Holdings has a net worth of $4.2 billion. We own 230 hotels in 40 countries. My lawyers charge $3,000 an hour." Before Ruth could respond, her phone rang. She answered with trembling hands. "Hello, Mrs. Williams. This is KCNR News. We would like your statement regarding the recordings we just received showing you coordinating a racist campaign against an African-American family. It will air in 20 minutes. Ruth dropped the phone. The sound echoed through the silent room like a final sentence. Patricia crossed her arms, finally allowing herself to smile. "You know, Mrs. Williams, my daughter taught me something important. That day in the park. She said that when we see someone who is hungry, we share our food. And when we see someone who is thirsty for justice..." She paused dramatically. "We quench that thirst too." Daniel motioned to his lawyers. "Gentlemen, proceed with criminal charges for conspiracy, threats, corruption, and racial discrimination. Oh, and make sure Mrs. Williams receives a copy of the eviction notice for her apartment." I bought the building this morning. Ruth finally understood the full extent of her defeat. You can't do this to me. I have rights. I have influence. You had, Daniel corrected, coldly. Past tense. Now you only have the consequences of your choices. As Ruth staggered out of the room, followed by the flashes of reporters already waiting in the hallway, Patricia felt a sense of justice so pure that it almost brought her to tears. But what moved her even more was what she would tell Zoe when she got home. That the kind man from the park had turned out to be not only rich, but a powerful ally in the fight against the injustice they had tried to impose on her. Because if there is anything more satisfying than seeing prejudice punished, it is knowing that a 9-year-old child, with her pure and innocent kindness, had been the catalyst for a justice so perfect it seemed orchestrated by the heavens themselves. 3 months later, Patricia sat on the porch of her new home, a gift from Daniel through his newly created foundation for families who were victims of housing discrimination. Zoe ran through the large yard, laughing as she played with Max, the golden retriever Daniel had given her. The evening news reported the latest updates on the scandal that had destroyed Ruth Williams's career. The federal investigation had uncovered a network of corruption involving the mayor, a judge, and real estate developers. Ruth had lost everything, her home, her frozen bank accounts, and she now faced 5 years in prison for conspiracy and fraud. "Mommy, did you see that?" Zoe called. "Mrs. Williams is crying on TV." Patricia sighed, turning off the screen. "Yes, sweetheart. Sometimes people make bad choices and they have to accept the consequences." Daniel visited regularly, always bringing stories about other families who had been helped by the Zoe Morrison Foundation, named after the little girl who had taught him that small gestures can change everything. The organization had already helped 400 families escape the grip of housing discrimination. "You know what impresses me the most?" Daniel said during one of his visits, watching Zoe teach Max tricks. "She never lost her kindness after everything she's been through. She still smiles at strangers, still offers help." Patricia nodded, pride swelling in her chest. "That's my Zoe." The world tried to harden her, but she chose to remain sweet. Patricia's life had been completely transformed. Daniel had hired her as the foundation's regional coordinator, with a salary 3 times higher than her previous 2 jobs combined. More importantly, she now had time to be present in her daughter's life. One afternoon, while organizing donations for the foundation, Zoe asked thoughtfully, "Mom, do you think Mrs. Williams learned anything?" Patricia paused, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes, my love, people only learn when they face the real consequences of their actions. The important thing is that we continue to be who we are, good people who do the right thing, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." That weekend, Daniel organized a housewarming party for the new community center built on the site of Mrs. Williams's old building. Dozens of families attended, many of them beneficiaries of the foundation. Zoe, now 10 years old, stood in front of the crowd and gave a short speech. "My mom always said that kindness is like planting seeds. Sometimes it takes a while, but something good always grows." Patricia watched her daughter with tears of pride. The little girl who once offered a sandwich to a stranger now inspired hundreds of people to choose kindness over prejudice. Later, Daniel pulled Patricia aside for a private conversation. "You know why I did all this, don't you?" Patricia smiled. "Because Zoe reminded you of something you had forgotten." "Exactly," Daniel said softly. "That there are still genuinely good people in the world, and that those people deserve to be protected." He looked out the window, watching Zoe play with the other children. Ruth Williams and people like her believe that kindness is weakness. We proved them wrong. That night, as Patricia tucked Zoe into bed, she reflected on the journey they had taken. From racist persecution to a transformed life, all because her daughter had chosen kindness when it was easier to look away. "Mommy," Zoe whispered sleepily. "I'm glad I gave him that sandwich. Now we have Max, a new house, and we're helping other families." Patricia kissed her daughter's forehead. "And do you know what? You would make the same choice again." "Always," Zoe replied, without hesitation. A child's kindness had destroyed a corruption scheme, transformed 2 lives, and created a foundation that would change hundreds more. Sometimes the universe just needs a little nudge in the right direction. Have you ever had the courage to do the right thing when everyone else chose the easy way out? If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more stories about how justice sometimes just needs a little help from fate.